Okay, and we're good to go.
Great, thank you, Hannah, and good evening, everybody. Welcome to the first of our planning committee meetings this week. In light of the government's most up-to-date guidance and rising COVID numbers, Frome Town Council has agreed that this meeting should not meet physically, but replaced by an informal meeting of the planning committee. The informal meeting of the planning committee will be held completely virtually. Virtual meetings cannot make formal decisions. Instead, the informal meeting will act as a consultative meeting, making recommendations on each of the applications before then. And myself, as Chair of Planning Committee and in consultation with Jane, the Planning Manager, will be asked to decide on the applications in line with the committee's recommendation using our emergency delegation. This arrangement is in accordance with the Council's standing orders. This means the formal meeting of the Planning Committee is cancelled and replaced with this informal meeting of the Planning Committee. I'll be following that. The meeting will take place over 2 days, given the large number of applications that were on the agenda. This is the first, and the second meeting will begin tomorrow, 6th of January at 7 p.m. You will need to register via a separate link for tomorrow's meeting, which you can find on our website. For panelists on the Zoom, please use electronic raise hand by clicking on the participants button at the bottom of your screen. For attendees on Zoom, please pose questions through the Q&A board. Attendees' names will become visible on the questions board for the record as your question is answered. Tonight, Jane will clerk and Hannah will manage the questions board and participant settings. The meeting will be recorded for minuting purpose, and we also live stream to our YouTube channel. Please also remember, as we always say, we operate on a safe space basis. Please be aware that comments that you say may offend or could offend, or we don't want to offend anybody. So please bear that in mind. So carrying on, agenda item number 1, comments, questions, information from public and or councillors. Anything from the public first. Something from Paul. Oh, you're muted.
Right, can you hear me now?
Yep, gotcha.
I've just got a question actually that that I want to pass on from a neighbour. Is this the right moment to do that?
Yeah, why not?
Okay, it's a question relating to the new development off Beechwood Avenue. I've forgotten what the name of the development is now. Anyway. Yeah, I think you're right. Something. Anyway, there's a neighbour stopped me and asked whether the developers were required to repair the footpath where it's been significantly damaged by heavy lorries, etc., in Beechwood Avenue. Goodrich something, I think, possibly, isn't it? Goodrich Court. Yeah. Yeah. So that's really just a question for Jane, really, whether the developers have got some sort of requirement to repair the footpath, really, and that's it.
I certainly would imagine so. Yes. I've got a feeling this may have come up previously, but I can look into it. I've made a note,
Right.
And can get in touch with the department at County Highways to see what's happening.
Great, thanks, Jane.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Thank you, Jane. Any other questions or comments from anybody? No, great. Agenda item number 2. As mentioned, this is an informal meeting, therefore we won't go and read out any apologies that we have from councillors, and they won't be recorded. So moving on to item agenda number 3, the declarations of any members' interests. Any declarations from anybody this time? No. Excellent, great. Item number 4, consider the major plan applications received. And over to Jane to take us through the first one.
Thank you. Just before I start, Hannah, could we make Paul and Damon, if they're both on the call, panelists?
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so this is the application for Mayday Saxonvale. It's an outline application with all matters reserved for a mixed-use regeneration proposal, including 182 dwellings use class C3, a hotel with use class C1, commercial and community provision falling under use classes E, F1 and F2, primary school within use class F1, and outdoor Lido, use class F2, with public open space, parkland and associated infrastructure. So we won't actually be receiving a presentation this evening. As you'll be aware, councillors have previously had a presentation of all the proposals, and we also facilitated a public engagement meeting on the 2nd of December, where Mayday Saxonvale and the development team presented their proposals. Great meeting, which was attended by 130 people. That was 30 people in person and 100 virtually on Zoom, which I think was a record for us. And the feedback from that meeting was overwhelming support for the proposals. So far, there are 840 comments have been received by Mendip, 6 objections and 132 supporting the application, which is unprecedented. I've never seen anything like that before. So I think before we perhaps go on to discuss the application, I wonder if this is a good point to see if there are any additional comments from the public who might be attending. And if so, if they could indicate in the chat or raise their hands that they'd like to speak. Nope. Nope. Okay.
Crack on.
Crack on. So I thought I would start with the Economic Manifesto that we received a copy of today, which contains a lot of detailed information. And I just wonder, because it's not something that we have discussed previously amongst ourselves, I wonder if anybody had any comments that they would like to make on that element.
Peter, over to you.
Thank you. I've had the opportunity to read through the Economic Manifesto, which we received earlier today. So the manifesto lays down some principles by which the development will proceed and underpins their proposals. In summary, those principles include enabling residents to find what they need for daily living on their doorstep, supporting local purchasing, providing security of tenure to enable enterprises and other occupiers to grow, providing space for innovation, promoting a circular economy, promoting fairness and inclusivity, including community ownership of assets, all of which are designed to secure economic, social and environmental resilience. Now, many of these principles actually chime with those in FTC's strategy, which we published in 2019, and they include our commitment to creating a positive and inclusive town where no one gets left behind, a thriving and resilient community and local economy, a town that actively encourages local people to participate in and feel ownership over ideas, spaces and assets, and a town that embraces innovation. I would say that in this respect, the manifesto is worthy of FTC's support. One other comment I would make is that the manifesto usefully sets out a summary of the outcomes of a commercial space survey of local businesses. Assuming that the data was collected, I would say this could be strengthened by actually setting out the quantum of employment space that respondents are seeking. But that sums up my comments really on the Economic Manifesto.
Great, thanks very much, Peter. Paul, did you have something you wanted to?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thanks, Peter, for that. I got a question for Paul, really, just for a bit of clarification. It says, possibly in that manifesto, I'm sure it does, and elsewhere in planning documents, that assets on Saxonvale will be held by Mayday Saxonvale, or potentially renamed to some other new name post development or whatever. I wasn't quite clear. Would that be set up as a kind of trust where there would be a number of trustees from the community, or how would that work?
So we haven't yet fully defined exactly how that would work. I think, a trustee style governance structure sounds about right. What we've tried to say from the outset is that it should be representative of the community. So it should include, for example, Frome Town Council as the local democratic body. But I think, we're at early stages of working out, exactly how that would be set out, and we would have the build phase as time to establish that. Representative of the local community. So, we're certainly open and go to other areas, other parts of the country to see, what other models people have employed.
I think you broke up a bit there, Paul, but I think we got the gist of what you were saying.
Yeah, sorry, I have a bit of an unstable connection today.
No problem.
Sorry.
Any other questions on the economic side of things?
Okay. Sorry, Paul, I should have asked you, were there any other members of your team that you'd like to be made panelists to answer any questions that might come up?
It was only Damon if he was here, but if he's not, then I'll take them.
Okay, thank you. So yes, as you might expect, we have councillors have had some discussion around the application before coming to the meeting, and actually, all very supportive of the proposals. But there are a few questions or things that we might like clarified. He's gone.
Okay.
So yes, just broadly to say, I think as Peter has said about the Economic Manifesto, that we fully support the amount of employment space that's being proposed, and that would clearly identify the need to accommodate the expansion of existing Frome-based businesses, which you've supported as part of your manifesto. Also, I think the first question I should ask is this is an outline application, but a lot of the elements are contained within the parameter plans. So the question is, so talking about the school and things like tiny homes and the Lido, will all of those things in your mind be approved at the outline stage within the parameter plans, or do you see that those will be agreed later on in the reserved matters stage?
I guess they're agreed at an outline stage, but they're all subject to detailed planning submissions at a later stage. But we're certainly seeing that as an absolute commitment from our side, that these are our commitments to the community, that this is what we're going to look to deliver across the site. Obviously, it may be that we put something forward at a detailed level at a later stage, and maybe the community has a strong view that we should be taking a different approach. So to that end, I'd say there's flexibility and room for manoeuvre, but yeah, we're certainly committing to all of those aspects. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So on that basis then, that there has been some question around St John's School, and whether or not they have actually made a formal commitment to relocate, and somebody else has also pointed out that actually the proposed site within Saxonvale actually seems to be a smaller site than their existing site. So I just wondered if you could clarify any of those points for us.
Yeah, so it's not my understanding that it's a smaller site, it's that it is a larger position. It's got a very good amount of green space, which I think is one of the issues they're facing at the moment. And it should provide space for a significantly larger school if it was required, possibly double the size. And that's partly because architecturally they'll be taking it from a clean slate, whereas the current school, I think, is just like enormous floors, but not in very usable space. So in terms of the position of the school, I think there's, overwhelming enthusiasm to enable the move, but clearly as a school, they're not in a position to, at this stage, commit to us that they're going to move, not least because, of course, the position we find ourselves in, which isn't a normal position. So, there is a bit of chicken and egg process here, if that's the right phrase. So we've got to get our planning approval approved, we've got to secure the site. And if that was in prospect, then we'd expect to be able to then engage with them on a more serious basis. And we would, in broad terms, look to put the school move as a later phase within the project. And that should give a large amount of time for, some years for the funding to be secured for the move. And we do think they would be able to use their existing site from a residential sale perspective once it's secured planning permission to provide the base funding for that move. But, being open and transparent, if it came to it, what we're saying is that we think a school in the town centre is important, and that St John's have an issue in their current site, and that a school within the Saxon Vale site and development would be a fantastic asset to that community in terms of how it functions as a community, and that schools should be at its heart. But if they were not able to move, and if we weren't able to get another school to move to that site, that which is the second thing we would then seek to achieve, if that ultimately was completely not possible, then we would look to use that area of the site for whatever else the community valued at that time, which could be residential, or could be commercial, or could be public facilities of some sort. But I would emphasise, we're determined to provide the maximum opportunity for the school to move there.
Councillors, any thoughts or comments on that element? No? Okay. There was some in relation to the school. It appears that it hasn't actually been included within the trip count as part of the transport assessment. So essentially, the traffic generated by the school hasn't been considered, and I just wondered if there was a reason for that, or if it will be added at a later stage, or what you feel the impacts of that might be.
I'm not sure on that one. I think I would have to get back to you on that one. Yeah, I'm not aware that it wasn't specifically included, so that would be something I have to take away.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was just some concern that, potentially the amount of traffic generated by the school, particularly at peak times, not having been accounted for isn't an accurate reflection in the transport assessment. But if that's the case, then that can always be added at a later stage.
And hopefully it should give a good opportunity for as many people as possible to walk to school, and it should be a much safer way to walk to school. Pedestrianised Vale, pedestrian priority Saxon Vale, plus down Garsdale Avenue from all those that live in that direction. And for those that did need to park, there is a car park, so they could park temporarily and turn around and come out. And I in and out of Saxon Vale, we're trying to balance the use of Vicarage Street. It's my internet connection gone unstable, I'm not sure.
Yeah,
yeah.
On my back. Okay. So I think we tried to maximize the way that you could interact coming in. So that, I suppose, that's context to what we can achieve.
And keeping on the sort of transport element of it, the quote from the Civic Society's comments, and they're saying that they would like to see further thought given to the proposed point of access from Vicarage Street. Despite the proposed change from two-way to one-way vehicular flow, more should be done to prevent this historic enclave remaining a rat run towards the busy retail and parking areas at the far end of Saxon Vale Road. and they would also like to see priority pedestrian flows across Saxonvale Road to establish a seamless connection between the existing town centre and its new extension. Furthermore, the treatment of the Garston roundabout and its approach road, including the right-hand turn into Alexandra Road, needs more robust consideration. And I think Paul Portland also made some comment about that. I don't know whether, Paul, you'd like to give your view on it before the other Paul replies.
Yeah, I can do. I agree with what the Civic Society is saying, but I do feel that it is reasonably well detailed in the planning application, in the travel documents. I think that point about the kind of seamless transition across Saxonvale is an important one, and it maybe isn't quite specific enough about that. I think there's a couple of crossings, and I guess maybe ideally we'd like to see that go a bit further so that pedestrians, etc., have priority over vehicles in that area. But I don't see any reason why that wouldn't be possible. I think it's really good the way it's set out already, but perhaps we'd just like to kind of push it a little bit further. So I don't know if Paul's frozen.
I think he has frozen, yeah.
So certainly open to more discussions around. I'm just going to turn off my video temporarily, and that might improve things. So totally open to further discussions around any aspect of that. And especially the interaction between. Try to strike that balance between, on the one hand, we want to ensure that there's pedestrian priority going down merchant of the Saxonvale site, going in and out of Saxonvale, down that road and from Garsdale Avenue, and not only that into Saxonvale. Then when you take that with the other residential areas that would be using that road, you would start to have the risk of backing up traffic onto that roundabout during rush hour. And we don't think the Highways Agency would find that acceptable, and probably anyone else would. So we tried to strike a balance between that and using Vicarage Street in a sympathetic way. So changing it from its current two-way operation, which I think for a lot of residents isn't working. So it means there's a lot of people doing U-turns on the street and a lot of congestion as two cars go past each other along that street. So by switching it to one way, having a better route for pedestrians walking down Vicarage Street. And actually, one of our team did go up and down Vicarage Street, speaking to the vast majority of people, the residents there, and they were all quite positive about a one-way switch with traffic calming measures. But we do acknowledge, and I've had a close to ideas if there were ways to do that with traffic management generally, then we'd be open to doing that. Can everyone still hear me?
Just about. You're breaking up a bit, yeah.
Oh God. Let me see if I can switch to another connection or something. Sorry. I'm not sure did everyone catch everything that I said?
Not everything, if I'm honest.
Okay, hang on. I might rejoin the meeting from my phone on a 4G connection. 1 second.
Okay. Do you want to carry on in the meantime, Jane, with some of the other comments that?
Oh, if Paul's rejoining, he won't be able to hear.
Oh, no, of course. Right.
Just to flag to you both while Paul's getting things sorted, we've got 2 question and answers from members of the public as well. Questions in there.
Okay, thanks, Hannah.
When Paul's back with us, I'll take those questions, or put those questions next.
Okay.
I'm not quite sure if Paul's back or not.
No, I'm not.
Oh,
yeah, there he is.
We can see you, but we can't hear you now.
Great.
Oh, no, we can hear you. Yes, yeah. Okay, so Hannah's just pointed out that we actually have a couple of questions from people who are watching the meeting. So pick those next. We'll start with Michael Dunk. He's asking, how many new jobs will be estimated to be created by the commercial and community spaces in this application, and how does this compare to the present Acorn permission? Did you catch that, Paul?
Just 1 second. I'm just trying to get to somewhere where I have a better connection. Apologies. Just 1 second. Yeah, can you just leave? I need to do the call from here. Jane, can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
we can hear you now.
So I think I got the question, which was around job generation.
Yes, yeah.
Great. So we've submitted in our economic statement, which was a precursor to the Economic Manifesto, that the current projections, when you look at the employment space, projected uses, and the multipliers that you get from that, that it will be generating around 540 additional jobs. Now, I'm not exactly sure what the position with the Acorn scheme is. It's certainly well under half the amount of employment space. But I don't think that they necessarily submitted an economic statement with those kind of figures, which was a bit surprising, because I think it is mandatory for an outline application of this scale. But that's as far as I'm aware.
Okay. Next question from Martin Dimmery, who says, I may have missed the detail, but will the developer build the school or simply provide the space? Has Somerset Education indicated an opinion on this?
So we would provide the space. We wouldn't be funding the school. And again, I think it's about getting to the next stage when Somerset and the school and the diocese could then commit and start to raise the necessary funds for the school. But until we get past the next stage and give them that opportunity, it's hard for them to comment and to commit at this stage.
Okay, thank you. Last question from Bill Lowe. I'm intrigued as to how this scheme can be delivered, since Acorn will have a development agreement, option agreement, or conditional contract subject to planning with Mendip. Lack of deliverability is not a reason for a planning refusal, but how can a Section 106 agreement be entered into to release a planning consent?
Yeah, so I mean, certainly we talked about this a bit at the public consultation and at the councillors' consultation, that clearly this is an unusual situation. We are applying for an outline application permission on a site that we don't have, we're not in a position to transact on at the moment. And, you know, bluntly, what that means is we're trying to put another plan on the table which is a plan we think is going to have, which clearly had much greater support than the Acorn scheme, and to politically convince Mendip that they should come to the table and change course to do a land transaction with us, to deliver, what Frome needs, what Frome is, and a plan that's supported by Frome, and a plan that delivers to Mendip's own local plan, which, evidentially their own partnership with Acorn simply does not. I could probably go on about this subject for a while, but I think we covered it a fair bit in the last meeting.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you. So next on my list is tiny homes, and I was just wondering whether or not there has been any, whether you've got anything to back up that there is actually a demand for the tiny homes, in the same way that you look at the demand for affordable housing, on which you negotiate with Mendip over. Has there actually been any work done to assess how much demand there is for tiny homes? I mean, anecdotally, we know that it's something that Frome appears to be keen on, but is there anything to support that?
So there probably isn't probably some sort of statistical survey completed at this stage. You're right that anecdotally that clearly is something that is a bit of a passion and interest of at least certain sections of the community in Frome with the tiny homes group, and we've had various discussions with Polly and her team about that, and we think there's also just general interest in smaller starter homes nationally. I think there's a scheme in prospect in Bristol, so I think regionally there's also a general level of interest in tiny homes, and we think there's also, in general terms, there is a need for starter homes within Frome for younger people to get onto the housing ladder, and clearly tiny homes is one of the ways to achieve that. Not that they would exclusively be for that section of the community. It could well also be even single retirees that would be looking for a smaller residential unit. So that's I guess where we are at the moment. Yeah.
Okay. I was just wondering whether or not if it might actually be a benefit to the application if there was some information to support that demand. But I mean, that's just a comment really, rather than anything else.
Yeah, that's true. And we did consider sending out a communication and trying to establish numbers, but it was a bit late in the day to be doing that. And I think at this stage it's probably a bit late to do that. I think there's sufficient anecdotal evidence to support that this is something, and we're not talking 100 units. We're talking 27, 28 units. We think there'd be easily enough demand to fill that.
Councillors, any comment on that element?
Jane, I'm going to jump in. Paul, I think when we spoke at the public consultation, you mentioned that that sort of section of the development was pretty flexible. I think it was probably something more for reserved matters, quite frankly. But the whole tiny homes thing, it tends to be, from what sort of some of the stuff that I've looked at, is more of a lifestyle choice than actually solving an affordable housing sort of need. Demand, and I'm just wondering if that flexibility is still going to be built in, hopefully as this goes forward.
Well, I guess when we get to detailed planning and as we approach each phase of this development, if there was at that stage clear evidence that there wasn't actually demand for tiny homes, then certainly you could look to change course. I think we certainly don't see it as necessarily just a lifestyle choice. We think for some people it also could be an affordable option, but we're also not saying that if you need an affordable home, this is where you should live. You should live in a tiny home. But for some, it may, just as it would for others, be somewhere they desire to live. And there could also be, just like in other aspects of the scheme, a thriving community with outdoor space kind of weaving between those units with great vantage points out over the site. But for some people, I think it'd be a very attractive place to live, full stop, affordable or otherwise. It's not for everyone, and that's okay. And I think having a variety of tenures and residential types within the site is advantageous. And I think, and also if there's a place that should, look to be ambitious and experiment with different ways of living, I think Froom's exactly the kind of place that could be doing that.
Totally agree there. Yeah. All right, thanks.
Cool.
Sorry, did you say Paul?
Yeah,
I mean, just on the tiny homes thing, I think, I mean, obviously there's a lot of details to come on that. It's very early days. It's outline planning application, and I agree with what Steve said. That for some it's a lifestyle choice, for others perhaps it's a necessity in some way. But I think personally, I think that having an area where as Paul said in his response, there can be some sort of experimentation, if you like, in terms of ways of living, is potentially a really exciting prospect. Personally, I think the tiny homes thing, there's many assumptions around tiny homes, that they're little kind of cabins, all independent of each other in some way, separated, etc. With green space, which is all lovely, but it sounds a little bit more rural, that approach. I think what would be really exciting on Saxonvale is to take the tiny homes idea and explore an urban approach to tiny homes, which I think would probably be slightly different. They may be more kind of a terrace approach or something like that, with community buildings, shared space, shared gardens, all those kind of things. So I think potentially it's really exciting, but I think we have to, it needs a lot of thinking about, because it could go wrong.
Yeah. Thanks, Paul.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. I think that was partly the reason behind the question. Given that the parameter plans are quite explicit about the fact that it will be tiny homes, and again with the school site, if it gets to the point where actually neither of those things can be provided, or that there isn't a demand for tiny homes as set out, that actually might make it make more difficult in terms of going to reserve matters, because you've been so specific about those elements of it. But that was just the reason for asking, really. If you won't have so much flexibility with the reserve matters if it's specifically called tiny homes, whereas, as Paul suggested, sorry, the other Paul, if you're talking about some kind of experimental living or community buildings, then that might give you a wider scope going forward. Oh, can't hear you, sorry.
You're on mute, Paul.
The exact design of those tiny homes, certainly could be, explored. But I think it's also worth noting that part of the reason that we're able to strike that balance between residential unit, that's still a relatively significant 182 number, plus all the employment space and facilities, and keeping car parking to the edge, is that we've built these tiny homes on top of what will be a 2-story car park. And so it could be that there'll be other, there are other types of small homes, and maybe they're not delivered in exactly that way, but we are envisaging variety, and we are envisaging them as separate, distinct units. But we would have to, there is absolutely need to be consideration for an urban setting and their layout therein, because clearly some other tiny house developments, for example, in the US, are much more, in a rural field, and that's not the setting. So that would have to be considered.
Great, thanks.
So sorry to jump around, Paul. We've had a further response from Bill Lowe, and his question is that how will Mendip get out of their contract with Acorn? They would have to be bought out by you or in breach of contract with Mendip.
So, well, first of all, that's a question that Mendip should be answering, and it's not something that I can answer. It's not least something I can't answer because the contract is, it's redacted, it's not visible properly in the public domain, and all those that have seen it are under strict NDAs. But we do believe that there is a way for them to exit that contract, principally based on time. But we don't know the absolute full details, and that complication may have to be something that's looked to overcome between all parties. But with all of these complications, and I hasten to add, I don't think that's a massive one. It's certainly not as big as people might think. With all of these complications, yeah, we acknowledge that this is a complicated situation. The answer to us isn't to say that those complications mean that Frome should permanently receive a development that's not suited to it. We think we need to work through systematically these complications and try and work in partnership with Mendip to overcome those complications, and work with Acorn to overcome those complications as best we can.
Okay, thank you. Any comments from councillors on that element? No. Okay. So we'll move on to the Lido. Never quite sure which way I'm supposed to say it. And I know you've spoken about this in the briefings and the public engagement. It's just again really and trying to understand how it will be financed and maintained, and then following on from that, but the fact that it's actually within the floodplain, and is the site location a suitable site ecologically or geologically? Clearly the floodplain of the river is such that there is a risk of flooding, and there's concern that it might interfere with the groundwater systems draining into the river. So I just wondered if you could talk about that a little bit further.
So yeah, on the latter point, I think it was answered in one of the Q&As that's on your website and on our website that came out of the town hall. And it was answered by Simon Brown, our landscape architect, who's been liaising with the drainage specialists. And I think that comprehensively answered it. I'm not going to try and paraphrase that because certainly not my area of expertise, and I could get that wrong. So I don't think there's any issues on whatever level of flooding of its position. It wouldn't contribute to that. If anything, it might assist. In terms of how it's funded, so it along with the rest of the community assets, because it would be owned by Mayday Saxonvale or its successor organisation, are funded by the rest of the site. So the residential and commercial builds, where they're sold on the open market, the revenue from that is received by the joint venture company we would form with Stories, and that joint venture would then provide to Mayday Saxonvale that cash, which would provide the capital to underpin that development alongside debt financing. And Lidos are being built up and down the country. There's a Lido in Shepton Mallet, which is a third of the size population-wise. And we've already had some conversations with companies that assist in the running of those Lidos and the build of those Lidos. And clearly you've got to be innovative. You've got to think about your timetable to make sure it's used as much as possible. But they're absolutely financially viable. I'm not saying they're cash cows by any stretch of the imagination, but they're viable, and they can be run. And I think, we've already seen quite a huge amount of enthusiasm for the Lido, not from everyone, and that's okay, because not everything in the scheme is for everyone, but a lot of enthusiasm from people in Frome, some, incredibly enthusiastic, and I think that demonstrates it would be a well-used resource. It's by the river with a cafe opposite and a playground. I think it would be part of a really attractive new public space in Frome.
Okay, thank you. Any councillors want to respond to that?
Yeah. Hi, Paul. Thanks for being here. I'm just interested about the cost. I was looking up the cost of Lidos. I think it's Abergavenny are spending £7 million on a Lido, and I looked at Shepton, and I think Mendip put in something like 50 grand a year just to keep it going. I'm sure it would be great to have a Lido. It's the old question, how are you going to fund it? If it comes from the sale of houses and it makes it possible, then great. I just wonder if it's realistic.
So we think it is. We think some of those figures for other Lidos that have been built, they're often built with huge kind of building structure around them. So it's not that number often includes ancillary infrastructure that sits around it. Whereas, you know, we're going to have relatively simple changing facilities, you know, and a simple wall around the exterior of the building. So we think it is, you know, we've modeled it. We think it is financially viable, using the cross subsidy from the rest of the site. And it's about how you manage the site. You know, just as an example, if all you do is have kind of lane swimming 24/7, well, you're going to have quite sparse participation. But if you engage with the local community and you have specific times for teenagers, for children's, for the triathlon club, for the swimming club, at different times, you can start to get much greater in you know, intensive use. So you do need to be innovative. But if you do that and you think about how it's being offered to the community and you don't go for all the bells and whistles in terms of the build, then we think it is viable.
Okay, right. Thanks for that.
Mark, so you got a hand up.
Yeah, thanks for that, Paul. I think this probably leads on to the other bit of the equation. You're saying that the Lido will be paid for possibly by a service charge imposed upon the tenants and residents of the area.
No, sorry. That I may have, if I've misled, sorry, that's not the intention. So the sale of the open market properties will provide a profit to the joint venture company we run with Stories that run the development, and that profit will be used as the base capital to fund the development of the Lido.
Okay.
So tenants wouldn't be subject to an ongoing charge. No.
But that's a one-off gain for the joint venture company, and that money will, you know, a Lido may have a 50-year life. That money will whittle down, unless it's invested incredibly well, will whittle down, and the money will run out to pay for the maintenance of the Lido. That leads me on to who will pay for the upkeep of the open spaces on the whole development. I know Acorn have an ambition to generously hand it over to Frome Town Council to run the green spaces and keep everything mown and lovely. What's the intention of your joint venture company with regard to that in the future? Because as you've just said, you know, you sell a property, your company will sell a property once, and that'll be the one-off money revenue you get. And so how does that carry on into the future? So
we're modeling it based on the Lido once it's built, that it's breaking even, and it's self-sustaining. It's not requiring an ongoing subsidy. That's the intention. In terms of the wider public realm, so at the moment that would be owned by Mayday Saxonvale, but it could be that there's a good discussion to be had about whether that's partially also with the town council. The public realm itself also provides an opportunity for using that for events and other kind of activities which could bring in some ongoing revenue. But yes, some of the profits would have to be set aside for ongoing maintenance, but also, you know, there'll be other charges that would be on, say, the businesses in the area that would also contribute towards that. So
but you can see,
we think it
concern, and perhaps other councillors' concern, that we could be, I don't want to say lumbered, but we could be gifted something that's going to cost us money to upkeep, and it'll be for the benefit of your residents and tenants. And I know it's be open to most of the public realm, but we've been caught like this on a couple of other places in Frome, and it's just going to be a further drain on our resources, which are getting very stretched.
Yeah, I can see that, and that's certainly not the intention. Maybe let me take that away, and I'll come back to you, Mark, with maybe some further thoughts. I need to maybe circle back on that. But yeah, most of the public spaces will be distinct from the residential areas. The residential areas will be kind of self-contained. The public realm will really be the two main squares, the Riverside area And the Riverside area certainly would be with Mayday Saxon Vale. And then the main, public squares, but those public squares again should be able to hold events, which will also provide some additional revenue.
I look forward to hearing what you find from that. Thank you.
Mark?
Any other councillors? There's a question from Michael Dunk, who's asking, have you got a plan B if the Lido turns out to be non-viable? I have concerns about whether it will be heated and how.
So we're looking to deploy solar across the entire site and kind of every rooftop. And we think that through either one of two models, either those are owned by the residents of each group, and then the power from that can be purchased by the Lido, or it's run as a community energy company with the tenants purchasing the electricity, and we're using the surplus for heating the Lido. So we're going to try and predominantly heat the Lido through that mechanism. In terms of the plan B for the Lido, no, we don't have a kind of an explicit plan B. If we did determine for whatever reason in the future that it was not viable or that it was not desired by the community, then I think that would be a case of going back to the community and saying, what should we do instead? And what's the picture of the town at that time? It could be in 5, 6, 7 years. So who knows what might be needed at that time, if it's more commercial space or a different kind of public facility. Or just space. I mean, who knows? But yeah.
Okay, thank you. Next question is about the sustainability of retaining some of the older buildings that are on site that will likely require retrofitting and refurbishment. Just like to understand your thoughts on that, please.
Yeah, so I mean, all of the buildings that sit around, say, the Western Warehouse are all very solid structures from what we've been able to ascertain, and would be cheaper than significantly cheaper than knocking them down and building something new. And the same would apply to the press shops and the Not Store, which are, you look at those tall ceilings, they're perfect for either a mezzanine or double floor workshop, office, kind of studio employment space. So we think they're the perfect structure, and we think reusing them would be cheaper than knocking them down and building something again. They're solid 20th century structures. Once the asbestos has been removed, and possibly definitely some roof work, they would provide a great structure to work within. And they've got very solid concrete floors, which are, all of these are very expensive to rebuild. So we think not only is it better from a sustainability, from a carbon footprint perspective, but it's a more viable option.
Okay. Councillors, or anybody, any comments on that?
Rich.
Hi, Paul. Do you think that's true of all the buildings down there? Because there are a couple of ropey looking buildings that, to me, don't appear to be significant. I take the point that they've probably got really good foundations, but you would still have to extensively retrofit, surely. And I know from past projects that looking after an old building is a really expensive thing to do. It's not necessarily a cheap option always.
Yeah. So some of this is the views of the architects that have looked at those buildings, who aren't with us tonight, but certainly the press shops and the Not Store are 20th century, quite solid structures. The core structure and the floor, which is the main of what you need for a commercial space building like that. And obviously then we're looking to have flexible modular space within, is absolutely the right structure. That doesn't mean it's the end of the build. There's certainly, cladding and other things, whole electrics, plumbing, etc., that would need to be put within it, and probably a replacement roof. But the core physical structure, I'm sure there's a right term for that, is solid. And we're not dealing with a building from, you know, the 18th century or anything like that. These are relatively modern buildings, and the buildings around the Western Warehouse are incredibly solid. You know, just going through them, which has been done previously.
Okay, thank you for that. I hadn't really appreciated that the actual framework is quite solid. They look so terrible. It's
I know, yeah. I can see what you're saying. I think I did give the similar comments when I first saw them, but I've been told they're very solid, and the graffiti and exterior kind of maybe masks that a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks.
Anyone else on that topic?
Can I just ask, Peter, maybe you can give us some feedback on the survey that was done on the Western Warehouse. Does that match with what the architect's survey did on the Western Warehouse, or is that yet to come?
I think we have done some work, but there is more to come, to be honest with you, in order to provide conclusive evidence about the structural condition of the buildings, and so I prefer not to comment in any detail. Really, I think there is some more work to be done before we can come to any conclusions. I mean, having said that, I think that on the face of it, the Western Warehouse in particular does look structurally sound. I couldn't comment on the other buildings, for example, the more modern buildings that Paul was talking about, which we haven't had an opportunity to survey. So, you know, I'd be reliant really on what Mayday Saxon Vale's architect has said about those.
Okay. Nobody else? No. Okay. I think you know, we've spoken about the transport assessment and perhaps some of the information missing from the trip counts, but actually, you know, when I last looked, Somerset County Council Highways hadn't responded. So you know, I think actually we would want to see their response before making any further comment on the highways impacts. Highways impacts assessments are quite difficult to understand if you're not a professional in those areas. So whilst we don't always necessarily agree with county highways, I don't think we'll necessarily be making any comment other than some of the information that may not be included with the trip counts. And a question that we always ask developers, and I know we've asked you before, but it's about viability assessment, and whether one has been produced and submitted to Mendip, and if we would be able to have sight of that at all.
So we haven't submitted a viability assessment to Mendip as part of this application, and you know, there's probably a couple of reasons for that. So number one, because we're not required to, policy compliance scheme, which is, I think, relatively unusual, and that's why maybe it's not normal to have seen one at this stage. We have got one behind the scenes with ourselves, and we've just updated it to reflect Q1 2022 costs, because we're very much not in the world of trying to just, you know, hope and dream that something's viable. And we've worked it through with stories, who are the ones who are going to run this as experienced professionals across the site. But there's no doubt that, and we've tried to baseline it off reasonable assumptions, but we haven't had yet a discussion with Mendip about a land transaction. So until we do that, we're frankly not going to be naive enough to put that out into the public domain for discussions, for Mendip to take things the wrong way, or for others to to interact with that in the wrong way. You know, what we're looking to do is to have a grown-up discussion and negotiation around the table with Mendip, which seeks to recruit the funds that they've spent over the medium term, but also deliver what their constituents are looking for. And there's flexibility within our plan to deliver that. And that's what we've modelled. I would say a plan is always a plan, and with the viability models that are produced by, you know, traditional developer model, where profit is the central objective, it's only really go in one direction. The cost typically will be, you know, it might be less than what they projected. The values, especially in this country, typically go up. And if anything changes, well, then that means additional profit for them. For us, it's going to be slightly different. That doesn't mean we certainly still have external equity partners. And, you know, if there is additional profit, that's also where some of it would go. But it will also go back into the scheme to deliver more of what's needed. So, you know, with any scheme, we've got a slightly more tricky job than a traditional developer, is finding an appropriate baseline for what we think is achievable without being lacking in ambition, and being positive enough, but also being prudent about, you know, where costs could go. And so we try to strike, a prudent baseline in our projections across costs, which have been completed by an independent consultancy, Mayscreen Consulting. And the values, I should also say that the values that we used, which we are adjusting at the moment for recent increases in line with Q1 2022 costs, but the values that we used in our model have been, almost identical to Acorn's figures in the JLL viability model. So we're always seeking to operate, in that space.
Thank you. Any questions, comments from councillors on that one?
No.
And the only other thing I would say is that, we also had a presentation from Stories at the public consultation. I know that's online. And I think I'm not going to repeat a lot what they said, which talks about how, the model that we've employed enables us to deliver more with less. I think they've explained that better than, well, I'm just not going to repeat it at this stage.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Sure. John, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's just a general comment. First of all, thank you for coming tonight and explaining this, but also the level of detail and your transparency is excellent. I think it's very much appreciated. And I generally support the scheme, but also being able to ask you these questions and you having the detailed answers like that, it's impressive and really, really encouraging.
Right, thanks.
Yeah.
And sorry about my internet connection. Otherwise, though.
Thanks.
Sorry, Paul. I missed a question from John Clark when we were talking about the outbuildings, which is, what plans do you have for the Western Warehouse in terms of future use? I understand the Town Council are at some point in discussion about using proceeds from the land sale to purchase and convert for community use.
So what we've done with all of the community assets is kind of set out an intention. I guess it's, it's a strong idea for what we think it could be used for. Some of them are pretty immovable. So the Lido would be a Lido. But within the Western Warehouse, we're first of all thinking that it would be a great business incubator space. And also the, business support groups that operate regionally might want to have a home there to work alongside businesses that are being incubated. We also think the ground floor would be a great artist display space. So those are the two kind of main uses alongside general studio space. But it would be for the successor organisation or renamed organisation and its trustees, if we follow the kind of model that Paul illuminated earlier, to decide how those premises would be leased to different tenants. So it would depend on what the community's priorities were at the time that the building was, about to be finished, which would decide how they would be used. And it could be that they were used in a particular way for 10 years or however long, and then at a different stage, they might be leased to a different tenant who provide something else to the community at that time. So we've got ideas, you know, and we think the infill building, for example, would be a great space for young people to perform and rehearse music. But, you know, it would be for that group to make a later decision in consultation with the community.
Thank you. And I think lastly from me, just to comment or to ask about environmental and ecological surveys. Have they been carried out?
So we've had to rely to some extent on other information in the public domain because we haven't been permitted access to the site for our consultants to conduct the required surveys. But a lot of the information in the public domain is recent enough, or information can be seen from above. We completed a drone survey to assist us in that, to effectively make the necessary assessments. So we don't think we've had to innovate a bit, but we think we've provided everything that's needed in that space.
Thank you. Well, that's the last of the grilling questions from me. I'm pleased to hear. So now over to councillors for any further questions.
I've got Rich first. Yeah.
Hi, Paul. I couldn't make the presentation before Christmas, but I did watch it, and Damon did really answer this question. So I'll make it a request, really, rather than a question. It's about the footbridge across the river or the boardwalk. I sort of urged Acorn to make it part of the scheme and not to put it to a section 106, but to kind of make it a really integral part of the scheme. And I would urge you to try and do the same. I appreciate it's not as easy as it might first appear, even though we've got 2 footbridges further downstream. But I do really think if you could have a really good pedestrian crossing somewhere halfway or further along by the river, that would really open up the whole site for people not to bring cars. You know, it would shorten their journey for a lot of people. And I think it would really, really enhance the scheme if you can do that. So it's a request, really, rather than a question.
So, well, if I just to very briefly then respond to that, yeah, I mean, we absolutely want to do that. And you're right, it's absolutely critical for connectivity. There just are some practical considerations because of the start and end point on either side of the bank, and because of it being a floodplain, how high that bridge would need to be from an Environment Agency perspective. But if it's at all possible, which we think it still is, then we would be doing that, no question.
Great, thanks, Rich. Anybody else? No. Great. Excellent. As Jane said, thanks very much, Paul. You sort of got an hour and a bit of more Q&A. I mean, personally, I admire your positivity and passion on this whole thing. As you rightly say, there's numerous obstacles, but you have to admire what you've done so far, and the non-profit aims, and the focus on low density affordable housing, workspace in that area is great, quite frankly. And thanks very much for your time and all your team's efforts. Really, it's been great. Thank you.
Brilliant, thanks, and great to have a chance to discuss it all and answer some questions.
Great. Jane.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I just really to sort of summarise, I think what we've heard, clearly we're supporting the application and supporting the Economic Manifesto. I think there were a few things such as some more information about pedestrian access and transitioning across the site that you said that you would look into in more detail, and potentially a comment about the tiny homes approach, maybe being exploring more urban approach or even experimental living, and I think you also said that you would look to see whether you could provide any more detail about the financial management and maintenance of the Lido. And I think that pretty much, so unless councillors feel that any of the other questions or elements haven't been sufficiently answered, I'm feeling that that's going to be the substance of our response to Mendip.
I think Paul said he was going to come back with some more estimates of ongoing cost of maintenance or arrangements of maintenance of the open spaces that.
Oh yeah, sorry, and open spaces. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, that's the bit I think I'm going to come back with information for Mark. I think at this stage, in terms of the outline application, what I'm certainly saying is that I think we have got more of a positive connection between the site and the town centre than for pedestrians. But we're all, I suppose I'm saying at a detailed stage, we'd be open to further discussions on that. And the same on tiny homes, although I hasten to add, we're committed to tiny homes, independent, varied tiny homes, you know, unless there's an indication that there is demand for that. And you know, the transport assessment and the plan around Vicarage Street is what we are submitting. But again, you know, at a detailed level, we'd be open to further discussion on that. But I am intending to come back in terms of what Mark's asking around the public realm management.
Right, thanks, Paul. So, I think I think Jane has summarised, but yeah, I think next steps, as I said at the start, this is an informal meeting, so we will prepare a response which all the councillors on this meeting will get a chance to see before it goes to Mendip. And then please, Jane or Peter, jump in. I think we're going to take that response to the full council meeting in a few weeks' time to be ratified. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah. So it's only for ratification. So we can, once councillors on the planning committee have seen it and okayed it, we can then submit that to Mendip.
Yeah.
But to say, just for process sake, it will be ratified by full council. So there won't be any changes made to that response by full council.
Yeah, great. Okay, Paul.
Just quickly, I just wanted to, say, like everyone else, thanks to Paul. And I just wanted to really make the point that it's so refreshing to have a planning application of this sort, which is where we're not kind of battling desperately with developers to try and get little concessions for the community, which, you know, they're trying to minimise the impact on their profit. I think hopefully Paul and the rest of the Mayday Saxonvale team are hearing that we're very positive about this and supportive, and it's a kind of a very slightly unusual situation where we're almost kind of overwhelmed with the amount of community offering that you're proposing, and perhaps we're maybe there's some hesitation to think, is it really possible that we could have a development like this? But you know, if we can, then we're all for it.
Yeah, totally echo that. Yeah, I think it's quite interesting, you know, with discussions about the viability. I think that someone said, Paul, that, you know, normally we want a viability assessment because developers are trying to get away from not being policy compliant. I mean, and this is, it's everything's turned on its head. So it's great. Thanks very much indeed. And thanks for your time and efforts.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Yeah, it's definitely heartening to hear those positive comments and thoughts. Thank you.
Great, well done. Thank you. Jane, over to you.
Thank you. Yes, so we're now going to go through the list of all the other applications that we've been consulted on by Mendip since the last meeting. And I'm sure not everybody wants to necessarily stay for this this part of the meeting, and I'm just making sure that I haven't missed any questions or anything from anybody else. No, okay. So the first application on the list that we're going to discuss is number 741 on our list, and that's 24 St John's Road, Frome. This is an outline planning application with all matters reserved for the erection of one detached dwelling house. I appreciate that the plans for this were only uploaded yesterday, and just bear with me while I share my screen. Okay. So, actually went to visit the site today with Steve because we were concerned that actually this is a very small, constrained plot. As you can see here in the photograph, this is the area here in which it's proposed to build the detached dwelling, and the footprint of that dwelling is shown here on this plan. And I have to say, my opinion when we looked at the site was it is very tight. It would be very cramped to get a detached dwelling in there. So yes, really just to hear your views, please. Shall I stop sharing, or do you want to carry on looking at it?
Could you show us the elevations, Jane?
There aren't any because it's just an outline application.
Okay.
So it's literally just the footprint is the detail that you'll get at this stage.
Can you remind us how big the proposed building is meant to be?
3-bedroom, I think.
Wow.
From memory. It doesn't give sizes. Yeah.
No, I haven't actually measured the footprint off of the plan, if I'm honest. But because it's an outline application, that's pretty much all they have to show is just the footprint of the building.
Looks to be a similar sort of size to number 24, doesn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, shall I start? It just it seems overdeveloped to me. Why not go for a 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom alternative? It just seems too big, and there's absolutely no space to get down the side of it, seemingly.
Yeah. Thanks, Rich. Anybody else? Any other comments? Got Lizzie.
Yeah, I'd agree. It seems too much for the small space. I'd also have that there's sort of reassurances in there about yes, there's going to be enough space for people to park for both properties. And we promise not to park on the street, but yet another kind of encroachment of parked cars onto yet another street worries me slightly. And I worry about it setting a precedent for others in those sorts of situations, and we're just going to encroach more and more concrete and tarmac into the spaces between houses and become much denser in some of our more dispersed areas. And it just sort of makes me nervous. Yeah. There's some nice eco stuff in there. You know, there's some nice statements about potential, you know, the eco quality of the build and so forth, but I think it's just too big.
Thanks, Lizzie. Lots of nodding. Anyone else? Rich again. Rich.
Yeah, I'm not saying you couldn't put a house there or you couldn't put some sort of dwelling there. I just don't think what I see in front of me makes sense at the moment.
Yeah.
So essentially, the sense is that as proposed, it's an overdevelopment of the site. Potentially, if the footprint was reduced and there was some assurance about relevant amount of parking being provided, then that might be a different case. Okay.
Yep, sounds good.
I'll get used to the whole not voting thing.
No, I know, it's weird, isn't it?
Yeah. Okay, so then
thanks, John.
So the next one up for discussion is number 743 on the list. This is Unit G1 at Frome Business Park and Manor Road. And it's for the erection of a new building as an expansion of the existing business space on the site for office, research and development and light industrial use. I'm just going to share my screen again.
Could you repeat the number, please?
743.
So again, I went with Steve today to have a look at the site. Apologies for the relatively poor quality of the photograph that I took. Right. So I don't know whether you can make it out, but just here in the corner is an existing building, which is part of the adjacent commercial units, which I think are run and owned by Somerset County Council. The proposed footprint of the building will be in this area here. And as you can just see in the photograph, there are a series of bungalows on the opposite side of the road. The Environmental Protection Officer has raised some concern about the fact that there is no noise impact assessment has been submitted, and given that the new building will be within 30 metres, was it? Yeah, of those residential units, he wanted to see a noise impact assessment, which obviously covered the operation of the businesses in the future, but also at the build stage, to minimise disruption for residents. But actually, having visited the site, one concern that we picked up on was actually the height of the buildings in relation to the bungalows. That this here was the existing building that I was pointing out in the previous photograph, and clearly that's, I think we worked out it was a metre higher than that building. And as you can see, there is a row of windows at first floor level. Now, the plan suggests that there will be some structural planting of additional trees that will take place that will actually screen this building from those properties and vice versa. But as you can see, the trees, so the additional planting would be around here, but even these existing trees don't, in my view, really screen the building, and raises concerns about overlooking, actually. So I can see a couple of hands up.
Yeah, Paul and then Mark, I can see.
Yeah, thanks for having a look at the site. I was just looking at the site plan, and so those houses we can see in the photograph, they're on the opposite side of Little Keyford Lane. That's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
So they're relatively close, but there's a road in between and a bit of landscaping and stuff like that. So I mean, I guess overlooking might be an issue, but it seems less of an issue perhaps if they're on the opposite side of the road. Just quickly, the other building, I'm just having a look. There's on the site plan, it's got a number on it. It says 6. I think that's the little building you can see in that elevation, is it? I guess.
Yeah.
Which is a commercial building as well.
Yeah. It is, yeah.
Mark?
Yeah, I've been to look at the place. Obviously familiar with it. I've got a couple of points I've probably made already. Not so worried about the overlooking on the one side, which is Manor Furlong, which is all industrial units. That's obviously okay. They're used to having people not overlooking them, I suppose. But Little Keyford Lane, the Robins, it's they're going to get David Wilson on one side. They're going to get this on the other side. They're going to get Selwood Garden Community at the bottom of the road. They're going to be completely hemmed in. You can't move into a place and never expect to be built around, but that's a consideration for those who live there, I think. And I guess tomorrow night we'll be hearing from them and their representatives about what they're already objecting to. there's a confusing thing in their statement I read, talking about 2,700 jobs. I couldn't quite work out what that meant, whether that's what Mendip wants to bring into the town or wants to stop people commuting out of, or whatever. I didn't quite get it, but I don't think they think they're going to create 2,700 jobs on this site. And they talk about job creation. As far as I can see, it's the DNA company, and they're already in Frome at the Commerce Park. So I guess they're going to unless they're going to have a huge expansion, they're going to relocate. So rather than create jobs, they're going to move jobs from one industrial estate to another. With the cars that will bring with them, because with all our best intentions, we're still not very good at getting people to go to work without being in a car. And I know, Jane, you've particularly raised in the past about the parking difficulties on the Manor Road estate. So, and I see they've provided 10 bicycle parking spaces, which is good, but I don't think it's going to help that much. So those are my concerns about it. I think it is quite a large building in a corner, which will take it, and I guess it will be using some of the car parking spaces to do the building they've already got. So those are some of my concerns.
Thanks, Mark. Lizzie.
Thank you. Sorry, too many buttons. Yeah, I think one thing that pleases me about it is that actually it is tucked into that back corner almost. I was thinking when I first saw the description of it that it was going to be on the junction and take up what is actually quite a nice little green buffer zone between the residential, the lane, a green buffer, and then the Tool and Gauge. And that kind of is quite a nice separation. I actually quite like the fact that it's just kind of reversed into the corner almost. My concern is that then that next bit, the next time they grow, they say, oh, well, look, we've still got this pocket of land here. Let's take that. Yeah. And it goes back to the point that was made earlier about those residents, that they're just losing everything around them potentially that is in any way sort of a bit of a green space or a bit of a breather from development. I think get the size of it right, and maybe, I don't know if we can sort of say, please don't build on this bit. Because otherwise that corner starts to become very highly developed. At the moment, it's an attractive campus. It's been a really imaginative use of that bit of space. It's quite an attractive part of the trading estate, and it's bringing kind of different types of jobs into what's formerly been a very light industrial sort of area. So that's all positive, but yeah, my concern is to get something that's going to fit, and then don't creep out from that into the rest of that site. Don't know whether we can ask for that.
Thanks, Lizzie. Yeah, I'm wondering if that mound of earth is there deliberately as a noise break and whatever for those houses, and by removing that, which they probably will, is going to, it's a bit of a double whammy for them, isn't it? They're losing the noise break and they're adding noise because there's a new building there. I suppose that's something for the environment officer.
So am I sort of sensing that there is there's general support for it, but maybe it just needs looking at again with a careful eye on the potential for overlooking and its position within the site?
Yeah, I think remember that it's providing employment, and that's
absolutely. I mean, I should have said obviously we support the provision of employment within the town. But yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think the employment side is great. As Lizzie said, maybe just a bit of tweaking here and there to make it a bit more acceptable.
A bit of consideration for the people who already live there.
Yeah. Sheila.
Come on. Oh, right. Yes. Can I just clarify that this development is by the same people that did Tool and Gauge?
It is. Yeah. It's an expansion of their operation.
That's what I understood, and I must admit that development from what was a pretty special and unusual building was, I think, done very sensitively. So I would hope that this is a continuation of that approach, and I think that ought to be credited. You know, that they have done a good job on that previous old existing building, and turned what was a sort of underused site into something that's pretty well used, and well, not even pretty well used, it's very well used and extremely well liked, and has a great improvement in that little area. And so I think that there's a lot of positive there, and hopefully they will have, you know, do a development that similarly works in that area.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I totally agree with that. I think, yeah, it's just we want to make sure that those residents on Little Keeford Lane aren't adversely impacted.
I mean, I think that is a really serious issue, because to be honest, their houses are getting less and less available, you know, desirable to sell. I mean, I think that, you know, with all the development that's going on around there, it must be really scary, I would imagine, for them.
Yeah.
Okay, so next on the list, she said, trying to find it, go to number 750 next, which is 20 Robbins Lane. Similar to the first application that we looked at, just bear with me while I try and find the screen again. So yes, this is the erection of a 3-bedroomed house with a workshop and a dropped curb. That's the description. So again, you know, we're looking at an infill area next to which is essentially the garden to the existing dwelling here. Again, we had a look at this site today. The footprint of the proposed building is here, and actually in this instance, I would say that this isn't such a tight squeeze, and you can't really see it very well in my photo, but its position would be roughly similar to the adjacent house here. I was concerned that potentially, you know, any sight lines and visibility when you come around the corner would be impacted. But you can see that it is actually set back the same amount as the house on the opposite side. So I'm not so sure that is an issue. One thing that we did note when we were on site was actually the position of this telephone pole. Not that that's necessarily anything to do with the planning application, but potentially that could be in the way. There's been no objection from Highways, and as part of the application, they're proposing to use air source heating with PVs, and it will be a prefab construction. So yeah, any comments from councillors?
Mark?
Yeah, I've been to look at this. It's not far from where I live. The photograph, with all due respect to the photographer, makes it look a bit smaller than it actually is. It's quite a reasonable.
Yeah.
Yes, actually.
It's quite a reasonable size space there, and also you can't see behind it because it backs onto nothing. So that's quite a good thing. I mean, behind it are flats, but they're some way away from it, so they won't be overlooked. The only thing I picked up was it seems to be a third taller than the house next door. If those are, what are we looking at on the roof there? I can see some PV things there, but what's above that? Are those Velux, or is that so? Is that third story intended to be occupied? In which case, I guess it's the guy who lives there at the moment isn't going to be too bothered. But if it comes selling on, it will be overlooking somebody else's house. That's the only concern I had. It is on paper taller than the ones around it.
Good point. Paul?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I mean, just on Mark's point, they are Velux windows, I can see them. And
Yeah.
I guess you won't actually be able to, well, the higher ones you won't be able to see out of, they'd be too high. There's a lower one there, which potentially you could see out of, but I don't think you'd be able to see into the neighbour's house. You would be able to see into their garden, I guess. But anyway, I wanted to that telegraph pole is on the site plan, and I hadn't noticed it before. I realised that's possibly why the parking arrangement, as shown, looks a bit weird, because they're trying to get around the electricity poles. And I imagine really it would make much more sense to move that and kind of open up that parking, so it's a little bit less skew width. And that was my major concern really. I don't have a particular objection to this in principle. It just seems a shame, as always, that the frontage of both houses, the new one and the existing one, will be completely dominated by car parking. I know this is the same all over the town, but it's just not very nice. But I think that's really my only concern.
Thanks, Paul. Lizzie?
Yeah, just picking up on that, I don't have any real issue about the development. The size of the plot looks like it can accommodate things, and you assured me about the kind of the road that we can see leading sort of away into the picture. I'm interested in the front of the existing property, where it looks like they want to get rid of the front garden, drop a curb and have a double driveway. And as to whether, I was just looking at an overhead map of the rest of the street off to the left of your picture. And the houses don't seem to follow the line of the road neatly. They seem to kind of approach the road on a diagonal. I wondered if there was any issue about visibility if the front of the house had a driveway coming out of it. And that's literally from Google Maps rather than from actually being there. So you'll have to forgive me on that.
Yeah, I didn't. I mean, we were there. I must admit, it wasn't noticeable that there was any issue on sight lines. I must admit, Lizzie.
Okay. Yeah, and highways haven't objected, so.
Cool.
I think the telegraph pole's an interesting one.
There's certainly a lot of wires going to it.
Yeah, the feeling it could come down at some point, whether intentional or not. Don't you?
Okay, thank you. So next on the list is.
Is there a next?
There is a next, yeah, sorry. 751. Just be quick. 42 Nanny Road. And you'll recall that we have seen this. Oh, sorry, messed that up completely. We saw this application last time, and it was for the retrospective erection of the 1.8 metre high fence and the boundary gates. We objected because we thought it would, because of the impact that it have on the amenity of the area, and there was also some concern about the visibility from the neighbour pulling out of their drive. So the application has been revised and the new plans are shown below, and you can see that the fence is proposed to be removed along there and the little bit that was there, but the new gates will remain. So that it is an improvement on what it was, but just if councillors had any, because we previously objected to it and they've revised the plans, it's just whether or not we want to maintain that objection or now whether we're happy with the removal of the fence but retaining the gates.
Lizzie?
Good to see the fence go, mainly because nobody asked if they could put the fence there in the first place. And I think that was probably the moral of the story from last time, was like, if you want to do it, you know, don't just build it and then ask. So, and I think, yeah, I don't have any objection to some gates.
No, me neither. Great. Anyone else? No. Well, so you happy with
that? So next on the list is number 753, 31 The Old Nurseries, and this is for the erection of a 2-storey side extension. So I've just highlighted this one. Really, I must admit, when I looked at the block plan previously, I hadn't appreciated. I was looking at the existing block plan with the proposed block plan being on a completely different plan, and hadn't appreciated actually quite how close the area of the two-storey extension would be to this property here, and just Civic Society commented about the fact that it will be overbearing for 1A Linfield Road, because it is a big extension. So just really, if there are any comments from councillors on that.
Is it an extension or a second home?
It's a two-storey side extension, which is nearly as big as the existing property.
Just the way the layout, it looks like it's having two front doors.
It doesn't show it as being two properties, at least not that I saw. No.
Okay, thank you.
That the second door is into a utility room.
Yeah.
It looks like on the plan. I just wanted to, I mean, I agree with what James just said. It does appear to be very close to the house in Linfield Road, and so I think that needs looking at by the planning officer.
Yeah.
But the other thing is, I mean, it's not really a planning issue, but it just seems slightly strange to me that these houses in the old nurseries haven't been actually built very long, and it's strange that somebody should buy a small house and extend it, such a huge amount in a matter of what, 5 years? Less than 5 years. Probably.
Less than 5 years, yeah.
Yeah. Why
Couple of years.
do you buy such a small house in the first place? But anyway, I guess that's up to the applicant, isn't it? But yeah. So I think it's just that issue with the proximity of the neighbouring house.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, Lizzie?
I think there's also just a general lack of information on this.
Yeah.
You go to the planning portal and some applications for similar things come with 27 documents, and this one has 3, one of which is the form. And so you go, well, we as a committee have always liked to know the story of a place and the rationale for doing things and why this kind of deserves to happen. And at the moment, we've got no information. We don't know quite what it's going to be made of, what the philosophy is behind it. Is this something that's going to be green and groovy? Is it, building more space to accommodate a bigger family? What's it all about? So I know that's not necessarily planning stuff, but it helps us as a committee sometimes to kind of understand why something is being proposed. Yeah. And why it might be a good addition to Froom's built environment rather than just an addition.
Yeah, very much agree. Thanks, Lizzie.
I think I did say in my notes, actually that there isn't any information about materials or the sustainability of the build. So, I'll make reference to that as well as the impact on 1A Linfield Road.
Great.
So that one more quickly, or 2 combined to raise for discussion. That's the old courthouse. Sorry, can't find the number. So it's 744, which is Irongate, which is in the Kingsway area, combined with 748, which is the courthouse. Essentially, they're all the same building. So one element of the proposal is to convert, or it's a resubmission for the alteration and conversion, retaining the existing ground floor uses and 1 existing flat and forming 5 new flats. So that has previously had permission, but I'm assuming that didn't happen, was never implemented. And the second element of it is actually internal alterations and the installation of a ramp to the front door. And as you'll have seen, that Historic England had some concerns about the ramp and the impact that that would have on the symmetry of the building. But in addition to that, I was slightly unsure about the decking that they were proposing to go around the plane tree. Is it a plane tree?
Yeah.
I think it's plane tree. And whether that was a suitable solution, you know, what impact that would have either on the tree or I know it's just paving slabs and gravel at the moment, but just want to hear any comments from councillors on that, really.
That tree's got a TPO on it, isn't it?
It has, yeah.
Yeah, because there was something going on last year about it, wasn't there? Where one of the utility services dug a big hole next to it or something.
Yeah.
All right.
There was a bit of history. There was a bit of history with the trees, probably about 6 years ago now, when there was a threat to have it chopped down because they were saying that the roots of the tree were disturbing the fabric of the building. But I think that was either disproved or they've overcome that in some way. So there was quite a bit of public outcry about that, I remember. So it's quite a significant tree, I guess. That was my main concern. The ramp, I can kind of understand if it's a significant old building, if it changes the character, but if it allows people to have disabled access, then that's probably a good thing. So I would have to leave that to a conservation officer and I'll do that. But yeah, the decking around the tree would concern me if there wasn't adequate provision made for the tree roots to be adequately watered and protected. And it certainly would cause some people in the town to comment about that, I would think. It's quite a popular tree.
Thanks, Rich. Got Paul there, Mark.
Yeah, on the decking, I mean, I don't quite understand what the decking's for. It seemed to be kind of just added on as an after thing or whatever. It kind of suggests to me that I don't know if we know who the owner is and what they're intending to do with the building. We do.
Oh, well, we know who owns the building. I don't know about it's
we know the name of the person.
Yeah, it's owned by Pang Properties.
Oh, is it? Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Oh, okay. So it kind of suggested to me the decking that there was going to be, you know, some sort of you know, cafe or something like that, and they're going to have chairs and tables out on the decking or something like that. So I don't necessarily see that the decking could be detrimental to the tree. I think it did say there would be gaps for water to run through into the tree roots, etc. But it's a slightly odd one. And on the ramp and the railings, etc. I mean, I didn't personally have any objection to it, but I do understand what the civil societies say and Historic England, and yeah, it doesn't seem a big deal. But I mean, I personally am not massively keen on the railings, and if they could have a ramp and steps without railings, then perhaps that would be better. But it doesn't seem to be terribly detrimental to me. But yeah, that's it really.
Thanks, Paul. Mark?
Yeah, I was going to ask. I'm just looking it up. I'm just looking at it now. I think they've been separated, haven't they? I think the Iron Gates and Courthouse are now separate. Mr. Pang still owns the courthouse, and a chap called, I'm just looking it up now. Somebody else owns Iron Gates. It's in the name of Alfred Lay from an E9 postcode in London. I was going to ask if we had any idea about what the purpose of the late pet shop was. Is it to retain as a retail premises? We haven't had a change of use or anything, have we, for the
It says for the existing use, I believe. So they're not proposing to change the use class. So I'm assuming it will be retail.
Yeah, that's what I would assume. And with regard to the courthouse, I think flats would be a nice use of it as long as they retained the character of the building. I'm very, very fond of it. It was my father's offices from the early 60s, and I've got fond memories of it smelling very tobacco-y and wood panelling and very much sort of gentlemanly clubbing in there. And I would like to see that retained, really. I don't want to go back to Judge Jeffreys as the hanging assizes in there, but back to the 60s would be quite nice.
Yeah, I think that's why Historic England have made some quite detailed comments about it. But
I wonder if the decking is to enable the Thai restaurant to expand out a bit in the summer.
yeah, potentially. I mean, I suppose really at the end of the day, it's just about whether whatever the decking is used for to ensure that it isn't detrimental to the tree.
Yeah.
And I know they've said that in their statement, but I think we should just reiterate that really.
Yeah, agree.
Do we need a view on the railings?
Anybody got any view on the railings?
I mean, as I said, I think I don't see it as terrible, but if it can pass building regs without the railings, then
yeah, I'm not sure about that. That was.
No, I'm not either.
How did the how did the pet shop trade without disabled access? If that's,
I think they have one of those wooden ones that you just put out when somebody.
As required.
Yeah.
Like on the train.
I'd certainly agree to not if the railings aren't necessary, that would be great, because it's like when we had the whole argument about railings and ramps coming up to the front of the town hall.
Yeah. Okay.
We ended up with a ski slope at one time, didn't we? It was really
well. There was a proposal.
Of course, it was really complicated.
Okay, we'll be pleased to know that I haven't highlighted any others for discussion, unless there's any that anybody else would like to raise.
Oh,
got to save something for tomorrow.
Yeah. Game of two hearts.
Just quickly, the one other slightly controversial one I thought might be was Cherry Grove. I don't know if that's worth a short discussion.
Oh yeah, so this is
752.
Yeah. So this is a demolition, rebuild, and extend existing single-story side extension.
Oh, sorry, that wasn't the one I meant.
Sorry,
no,
you meant the nursing home, didn't you?
I did, yeah.
Oh, the nursing home, yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
What number was that? That was
745.
745. Yeah.
Yeah.
Green Hill Grange. I don't know why I'm getting mixed up between those two.
So I haven't uploaded any plans in advance of that one. So yeah, Green Hill Grange, Capstone Close, and it's the removal of the existing storage building, extension of the existing care home for office space, storage, and extension to the living area and bedrooms, and the erection of a single-story wellness room, bin store, and storage building. I think I did comment that actually this will reduce the garden area, but I did say that I thought it would provide a better living environment for the residents, but that was based on, I guess, what we were being told by the applicants. So over to you for any comment.
Yeah, I mean, the one comment that I made or wanted to make was that in principle, I don't object to it. However, there was part of the, as Jane just said, part of the extension which does away with some existing green space at the front of the building. And it seems to me there's a balance to be struck between providing ensuite toilet facilities or bathrooms or whatever as they're proposing, and having a nice outlook, because with the extension, the outlook for those residents would be directly onto a car park instead of a green space. So I don't know where that balance is, but it seems to me that the green space, particularly for a care home, is really important. But maybe en suites are more important. I guess, how do we know?
Yeah.
But yeah, it was just an issue.
Yeah, tricky one, isn't it? I mean, how? Yeah, And just
Isn't Greenhouse Grange the one that has a really lovely aspect out the back, but not necessarily out the front? And I think that's worth. I'm pretty sure that that's the case at Greenhill Grange. So the front is basically a car park, but out the back is beautiful open space.
I don't.
It's visible on the plan.
No, that you can't. I certainly didn't pick that up from the plan. But yeah, I guess it is difficult. Like you say, no. I suppose is it a case of no objection in principle, but we do regret the loss of the green space?
Well, that would be for me. I just wonder if people need a bit extra time to look at this one. We've got part 2 tomorrow. Have we got any a sort of 5-minute slot tomorrow? We could all.
Yeah, we can.
Yeah.
I mean, it is on the agenda for discussion for today, and we've split the meeting in 2. So yes, we can transfer to tomorrow's meeting.
Right. Let's defer that one till tomorrow then.
Yeah. Any others?
Have a drive around, have a look at it. Anything else?
Okay.
Great. That's the agenda now. Really exciting. So we can reconvene tomorrow night, same time, same place, for the Little Keyford sites.